Greetings, Taku Faithful. Thank you for joining me again this week. Once again, it's Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief, and I'm here to bring you all yet again another Arrow episode review right here on Otaku Assemble Weekly, and as always, to bring you the latest in this week's Arrow episode review. And this is my review of Season 4, Episode 21, entitled Monument Point. Now, general thoughts on this week's episode. This was another pretty good episode. I think that the writing was actually solid this week, and I think it was a very much appropriate second part to what can be considered as the four-part finale for this season. Now, I don't have too many issues about this episode. I only have a few, and they're very small, very minor issues, and I'll get into more detail with that later on in this review. So let's kick things off with a brief synopsis of this episode. Now, in this week's episode, we pick up right where we left off from last week's episode, with Oliver, Diggle, Felicity, and Lila having to counteract the nuclear threat that they now face from Damien Darhk and Hive, now that they have the Rubicon that they stole from Lila in last week's episode. In order to confront this threat, they employed the services of Felicity's father, Noah, aka the Calculator, because according to Team Arrow and Hive, he is the only man capable of actually deterring the nuclear threat. So Noah aids them throughout the episode, all the while Oliver and the rest of Team Arrow are also trying to track down Damien Darhk and learn his location, which by episode's end, we actually do get the face-to-face with Darhk. Meanwhile, while this is going on, Thea, we learned that in this week's episode, Thea was actually placed in Darhk's underground bunker that is being appropriately titled the Ark. Thea was actually placed there by Malcolm Merlin as part of Malcolm, that was pretty much Malcolm's payoff for aiding Darhk in his escape and whatnot. So Thea was placed there by Malcolm, of course, for her own protection so that she could survive the nuclear holocaust. But that exchange is abruptly interrupted when we find out that Anarchy returns in this week's episode. He's infiltrated the Ark, and so Malcolm and Thea have to team up in order to keep him from sabotaging the air supply that they have in the Ark, right? So that pretty much is the synopsis for the episode in a nutshell. Now I'm going to go into a bit more detail about a couple of things in the episode. So first and foremost, I want to go ahead and I want to address the subplot with Quentin and Donna, Felicity's mom. Okay, here's the thing. Now, the subplot that we got in this week's episode, apparently Quentin wrote and signed an affidavit claiming that he had no knowledge that Laurel was the Black Canary, and in doing so, this is supposed to get him his job back with the Star City Police Department, right? Okay, here's the thing, and then of course that subplot plays out where Donna questions Quentin's motives and where his heart is and trying to make that decision, going on record saying that he had no knowledge of that, questioning whether or not, he was ashamed of Laurel or if he was proud of her, this, that, and the other. And then that whole subplot resolves itself with Quentin deciding that no, he does claim, he takes full responsibility and he does claim full knowledge of Laurel's actions, and hopefully, he's hoping that telling the truth, he'll be rewarded by getting his job back. Here's the thing with that, though. I'm not saying that subplot was bad. I don't think it was bad at all. In fact, I think it was one of the better parts of the episode. I've said before, and I'll say it again, actually, I like what they've done with Quentin this season, and I like the majority of his scenes. I think this is probably one of the most, if not the most intriguing storyline and story arc that Quentin has had in the entire series. Here's the thing, though. I just feel like the subplot was misplaced. Like, I don't know why it was in this episode. And I was thinking that we were going to get some type of payoff from it, some type of follow-up by the end of the episode, and we didn't get that. So maybe that's going to play a bigger role, because we still got 2 episodes left. So maybe that will come back up in the last 2 episodes of the season, or maybe that's foreshadowing something that we'll get at the start of next season. I don't know, but once again, the subplot was not bad, and it was actually written fairly well. I just think it was misplaced. Like, I don't know why it's in this episode. So, next thing I want to talk about is pretty much everything that we got with Team Arrow in this episode. Number 1, Noah's back. I love Noah's character. I dig this guy. I love the actor portraying him, and I'm so glad that they decided to bring him back into this season, because once he was arrested, I wasn't sure at what point we'd be seeing him again. Like, I figured we would be seeing him again because, of course, the whole absentee father, double life, criminal hacker bit with him and Felicity, like, that still hasn't been resolved. So I figured he'd come back at some point. I just didn't think it'd be this season. So that was pretty cool. Another thing, we got Vinnie Jones returning in this episode as Brick. Like, okay, here's the thing. Him being used as muscle for Hive, that I was like, okay, I'm not too sure about, I'm not too sure why Darhk would need him of all people. But then again, you got to remember, Darhk freed a lot of the prisoners when he escaped from prison. So it makes sense that he would employ some of them into, to aid him in Project Genesis. And the thing is, especially with Brick, because Brick is sort of like the mob boss of the villains we've seen. He's a mob boss in that regard, so it sort of makes sense that Brick would help him. All in all, like I said, not bad. It actually was a pleasant surprise, so I dug that. And the other thing I do want to mention, which they didn't go into much detail with it in this episode, just because I figure it's going to pay off towards the end, is John's lie to Lila in last week's episode. Now, if you all saw my review, you remember I did bring that up, that John told her that he killed Andy in self-defense. And of course, Oliver questions him about that in this week's episode. I'm glad that it was brought up like in the very next episode. It was brought up almost immediately, because I think that is before we even see the title card. So I'm hoping that will sort of play in within the last 2 episodes. But the fact that they brought that up, I thought that was good. But yeah, by and large, I think for the most part, Team Arrow's story in this episode, pretty solid. I don't really find many issues with it. Now, I will say this. I do want to bring this up briefly, and I'll probably touch on this more in my Legends of Tomorrow episode review, because I actually got 2 episodes to review for that. Last week's episode and tomorrow's episode. But here's the thing. So in this week's episode, Felicity finally got terminated from Palmer Tech, right? And so, of course, now, we don't know who will replace her. We know that the board, of course, is in control of the company now. Here's the thing. I just want to mention it here. I really think that Ray needs to return to Palmer Tech. Even if he doesn't become a reoccurring character in Arrow anymore, I think he needs to be back at his own company, especially considering the fact that what we've seen done to his tech in Legends of Tomorrow, how they've gone into the future and his tech has sort of been perverted. Like, he needs to come back and start, being the driving force in that company again. He needs to be the man at the wheel. And I'm hoping, and in hindsight, I really wish they would have made this Ray's main storyline in Legends of Tomorrow, is sort of seeing what happens. Because remember, I think that Ray is still operating with that whole, oh, everyone thinks that I'm dead, so I'm just going to remain dead to the public. I think he's still operating like that. And if that's going to be the case, once again, going back to Legends of Tomorrow, that should have been his story arc. Seeing what happens when he is not there, taking control and making the choices, especially since he's the one who said in that show he believes in choices. The idea that his story arc is not centered in that whole bit about responsibility. Like, if anything, they really need to bring him back to Palmer Tech. I wouldn't mind having him on the show again, especially now that Laurel's gone, but he really needs to return to his company at some point in time in the future. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to touch up on Thea and Malcolm's storyline this episode. Now, for the most part, I thought that storyline was fine. And if anything, the few complaints I have about this episode, they all stem from that storyline. So here's my first complaint. Now, I like seeing Malcolm and Thea on camera together. I like the way in which those characters are written. I like their banter with each other, and I like the chemistry that the actors have with each other. Here's my thing, though. I really would have preferred to see Thea take the initiative and be the proactive one in whatever was going on with the arc. I don't like that Malcolm was the driving force in that conflict for this episode. I don't like that because it seems like too often Thea's, all of her motivations and most of what she does in the series is driven by a male character. And I know I brought that up I know I had to have brought that up in a previous review. And if I haven't, then I'm taking the opportunity to do so now. Thea is one of my favorite characters on the show. And for the most part, she was always my favorite female character on the show. But once again, the fact that even Anarchy himself comments on that in this episode, like, I didn't care for the fact that Malcolm was that driving force. Thea should have really been that. The other thing is, I question, correct me if I'm wrong, guys, please feel free in the comments below, let me know. Did Anarchy get into the arc by disguising himself as one of the ghosts? And if that was the case, I cannot believe that Damien Darhk's personal underground bunker, that he selected people to repopulate the world after he completely tears it asunder with a nuclear strike, that would be so easily infiltrated. I question the security running that place. Like, seriously? That crazy mofo was able to get past your security? Now, here's the other thing, too. And this is probably the big legitimate complaint I have about this episode, though. We get Anarchy back in this episode, right? And once again, like I say, I like him as a reoccurring villain. Here's the thing, though. This is the second time he's returned. So this is his third appearance in this season. But guess what? He infiltrates the arc because he has a bone to pick with Damien Darhk. You know, he has a score to settle, but he doesn't come in contact with Darhk. This is the second time he does not come in contact with Darhk. Look, you can no longer use that as his motivation if you're never going to give him a face-to-face with the man. Like, if anything, that storyline needs to be wrapped up. That needs to happen. Either we're going to get rid of Anarchy altogether, because it seems like, Anarchy didn't even bite the bullet in this episode. He's still alive. So either Darhk's going to bite the bullet in the next 2 episodes and Anarchy's still going to be around. I really hope they don't do that. If you're going to keep bringing this guy up and keep using that as his motivation, there has to be a payoff there at some point. And I was a bit disappointed that payoff still hasn't happened. If anything, I think it would have been even better. Roll with me on this one, okay? Let me know what you guys think about this. What if Anarchy had infiltrated the arc, right? Was disguising himself as a ghost the entire time, and he was the one that actually made out Thea, and they worked together in order to sort of, they sort of worked together, almost like what Thea said, where how she offered to help him take down Darhk. They sort of worked together as moles inside the arc and then bided their time before Damien showed up, and then that's when he could reveal himself to Damien. And then so it could have been like this ambush, if you will. Because ideally, Darhk would have if Darhk made it to the arc, he would have dealt with Thea the second he showed up there, right? Presumably. Now we know Malcolm's protecting her, but if in fact Darhk was going to go to the arc, that's when Anarchy should have sprung like, hey mofo, I got you now. You know what I'm saying? But I'm starting to get the feel Darhk's never going to show up at the arc. In which case, now we have to play this whole game about Thea sort of trying to escape it, but now I'm not even sure how that's going to work out because Malcolm's there and he's keeping an eye on her, and if anything, he's going to make sure she stays there. So I'm kind of wrestling with that idea, y'all, because that means she won't rejoin the rest of the team. If that's the case. So we'll just have to see. We'll just have to see. But like I said, even besides the few comments I brought up in this review, by and large, the episode is still solid. Still a solid episode this week. I'm liking what I'm getting so far. And I'll even go as far as to say, by and large, overall, with the exception of Laurel's death, still a solid season. Now, let's just see if they'll stick the landing. I have absolutely no idea what they're doing with those flashbacks. Once again, I'm done talking about those. I have no idea, but I will say this, and this is going to be my final note for the review. I pray that what they don't do is that the flashbacks do not end with some type of deus ex machina, what the revelation about magic and how it works that Oliver experiences on that island, and then that information is what allows him to beat Darhk in the end. I really hope they don't do that, and the reason for that is if that was the case, why didn't Oliver use whatever that resolution is in the first damn place? I really hope that's not where the flashbacks end. I hope there is not some mysterious answer that has yet to be revealed until the moment Oliver needs to call on that to beat Darhk. I really hope they don't do that. Because that at that point I'm going to be like, bruh, y'all, no. So anyway, that's going to go ahead and conclude this week's Arrow episode review. I want to thank you all for joining me again this week. In the comments below, leave your thoughts on this week's episode. Let me know some of the things you all are expecting for the final 2 episodes. If you like this video, please feel free, thumb it up, share it with other fans of the show and people you think would enjoy this review. And if you have yet to do so, subscribe to the OAW YouTube channel. Annotation is above head. And with that being said, this has been Larry Williams, OAW Commander-in-Chief. I'm signing off, and until next time, peace.